Howdy, folks. I am Josh Wing Moreno, and today, on behalf of my group, I will be presenting a brief competitive analysis of Netflix, HBO, and Hulu. In this presentation, we will tackle 6 topics in this summary. We're going to define the strategic group, go over the history, present the 5 forces, go over the PEST analysis, talk about growth, scale, scope, and firm boundaries, and end with conclusions and recommendations. And each team member provided content for their assigned topic. I am simply presenting on everyone's behalf. So before we get started, it is important to understand some of the acronyms that will be used in this presentation. For example, OTT, that means over the top and describes the delivery of TV and film via the internet without requiring users to subscribe to a traditional cable or satellite pay TV service. We also have on-demand service, which allows end users to use cloud computing, storage software, and other resources instantly, and in many cases without limits. VOD, or VOD, is the acronym for Video On Demand and has several subcategories, the first of which is Advertising-Based Video On Demand, or AVOD, which refers to video streaming services that users may access for free or a discounted rate with content interspersed with advertisements. SVOD means Subscription Video On Demand. This refers to a video streaming service that users must subscribe to in order to access, and TVOD means Transactional Video On Demand, and allows consumers to purchase content on a pay-per-view basis, and consumers generally have the option to either rent or buy. We're going to define the strategic group between Netflix, Hulu, and HBO. And while you can assume that OTT services are able to be used anywhere around the world, it's not true. This fact relies on internet access, government regulation, and also streaming-specific platforms. Hulu is a streaming service that only allows subscribers located within the US and Puerto Rico. HBO currently can be used within 50 countries and Netflix in 190 countries. However, there are other streaming services who are considered fringe players, but are worthwhile to note. Services such as Philo, Sling TV, and Peacock have their own following and have been on the rise. Netflix currently boasts the highest market share within the OTT industry. Netflix currently has 182.8 million subscribers with the highest revenue of the bunch. Coming in second in regard to shares HBO, they currently have over 43 million subscribers, while increasing their revenue to $5.5 billion. Hulu has now reached a total upwards of 30 million subscribers, and they come in third on the list in regards to market share within this strategic group. Each of the 3 firms in the strategic group had vastly different ways of forming. Netflix was founded in 1997 and started out as a company that sold and rented DVDs to consumers from their website and would have those movies shipped directly to consumers. With the introduction of streaming in 2007, Netflix began to move away from this old and traditional way of selling movies and began its journey into the streaming world. HBO, on the other hand, was founded in 1972 by Warner Media Studios and Networks. What really put this company on the map was in 1975, when they became the first American network to deliver its programming via satellite. Finally, Hulu was formed in 2007, just after Netflix, and was made public in 2008 by NBC Universal and News Corporation. And in 2009, the Walt Disney Company took an equity stake in Hulu and announced its plan to provide some of its feature films and TV shows. While each of these 3 firms were founded in different ways, they all provide the same services to consumers and have the same demand, supply, and infrastructural challenges. So we'll talk first about the demand and supply forces. The use of the internet is a huge force for this strategic group. According to the Berkeley Economic Review, internet speed increases cut loading times, making streaming a more reliable source of entertainment. The number of mobile devices owned by Americans skyrocketed, allowing for easier use of common streaming apps. Without an internet, these 3 firms would cease to exist, and they all essentially rely on it to get their content supplied to consumers. In addition, the fact that all 3 of the firms in this strategic group have all transitioned to part production companies, meaning they put out their own original content, has increased their overall demand among consumers. This approach keeps people subscribed to the streaming service, even if some of their favorite shows move somewhere else. Production companies often have exclusive control over the content they create, which means if enough people are interested in it, it will differentiate their product. There is no doubt that the creation of original content has allowed specific streaming platforms to have an edge over their competitors. The better the content they produce and put out, the more customers they could potentially gain from such an investment. Most streaming platforms today, including Netflix, Hulu, and HBO, create their own original content. Netflix's introduction to this idea has changed the industry significantly and allowed these firms to be able to bring in far more revenue than they had before. Some of the infrastructural forces include consumers cannot and still cannot get enough of the fact that they could watch a movie at any time at their convenience. If it were not for the introduction of streaming, firms such as Netflix, Hulu, and HBO would not be where they are at today. Netflix was really the founder of the service and has set a precedent that will stick around for years to come. As mentioned earlier, HBO became the first American network to deliver its programming via satellite, making them the first national cable channel which set a precedent for its competitors and allowed for the firm's growth and expansion over the past 40 years. Technology is constantly changing, and it is companies that are able to adopt new methods and ideas that are put forth, such as programming via satellite, that see the most success, just as HBO has seen. When taking a look at Hulu, one of the greatest driving forces for this firm is its on-demand service. Neither Netflix or Hulu have anything like that on their platforms. Consumers might turn to streaming platforms to watch their favorite movies and TV shows, or SVODs. However, they still want to see some live TV, which is what Hulu provides to them. Next, we're going to talk about the five forces. And we can't talk about the five forces without talking about internal rivalry, suppliers, buyers, exit entrants, and substitutes. With multiple firms, you will have multiple price and feature options. From the cheap side of Hulu, we're at $5.99 to it's about $54.99 live TV option. It offers something for everybody, including its parent company's bundle. Netflix has different prices for the number of screens and quality, as well as the top original content in the SVOD industry. As the industry leader, Netflix has been the trendsetter through all 13 years. HBO Max brings quality over quantity, with over 10,000 hours of quality content to its SVOD service. It truly encompasses it's not TV, it's HBO. It's HBO Max. On the supplier side, the supplier category is just as important as its likelihood to change. Licensing content versus original content is the big risk versus reward question in the industry. Shows like Friends and The Office have cult fan bases, but demand tens of millions of dollars a year for their access. Original content is paid for once and forever, owned after. Both have their pros and cons, but the development and access to original content seems to be the direction the industry is most likely to move towards. Buyers currently have tons of options due to a saturated market, in part due to the 6 new firms that enter the market in the last year. The outcome of the HBO Max deal versus the streaming device companies will play a major factor in this aspect. If HBO wins the negotiations, they could rise to the ranks of Amazon and Netflix. If the distributors win, it could be a shift in power of who controls this industry, from the production companies to the distribution companies. The industry is moving towards owning its own SVOD service and only offering its content, bringing an oligarchy structure to the industry and less options to use the licensing clearinghouse method to enter this industry. The market is already oversaturated, and entering at this current time is unlikely to bring in much revenue unless providing A-class content. With the industry being so young, it has not seen any major participants exit the industry. And finally, we'll talk about substitutes. There are lots of options in the industry, but not too many substitutes. One of the few substitutes are traditional cable and the firm Sling TV, which lets you pick a customized number of channels you can have access to. Hulu has begun to blend the two industries with its live TV option, but is still considered substitutes of each other. Live sports and TV shows such as Saturday Night Live, among others, are what keep cable TV alive. And now we're at the PEST slide, and so we'll talk one by one. On the political side, streaming companies are like tech companies and television companies, and must comply with region-specific legislation wherever they seek to provide their service. Hulu, for example, being owned by Disney, which operates in China, must be cognizant of the requirements of the Chinese government censorship policies. Netflix must comply with an EU law that categorizes it as a television provider, requiring Netflix to maintain at least 30% European content on its platform and to pay a 26% tax rate. On the economic side, the global recession will affect consumer spending as budgets get tighter for a household. That subscriber must decide whether or not to maintain entertainment expenses as part of their household budget. This will increase consumer price sensitivity and could lead to a decline in subscriber growth rate. Given Netflix's global nature, it must deal with exchange rates and tax laws in each country. On the socio-cultural side, video streaming is a largely millennial consumer base. Consumers are also moving more towards consuming content on smartphones, pushing a need to be accessible and affordable, even when Wi-Fi is not. On the technology side, user experience is the primary driver of technological investment. While smart devices and internet access are growing throughout the world, not all locations enjoy access to high-speed internet, and streaming consumes a lot of data. It's also crucial to maintain engagement with the consumer by providing useful recommendations based on their viewing activity. On the environmental side, server farms required for housing the digital content and providing capacity to stream that content create massive carbon emissions. Corporate social responsibility, or CSR, with an emphasis on sustainability and renewable energy consumption, influences consumer purchasing choices. And finally, legal, user data governance, data privacy, regional content restrictions, class action lawsuits, and in the US, deregulation of the internet service providers, or ISPs, threatens many streaming services that are not already affiliated with these ISPs. Now we're going to talk about the growth, scale, scope, and firm boundaries. The first core competency that allowed these companies to break through was their ability to conveniently deliver content to consumers like never before. Creativity and original programming emerged as the next focus for companies to compete against studios and networks that did the same. Companies in the strategic group benefit greatly from economies of scale due to the high fixed cost nature of the business model. However, they can experience diseconomies of scale due to high penetration in a particular market that leads to diminishing returns on marketing expenses. Companies integrating both vertically and horizontally have been apparent in recent years. For example, Disney's acquisition of Hulu meant vertical expansion, and with the release of Disney Plus, it also meant horizontal expansion. Another example would be Warner Media's acquisition of HBO. Netflix and Amazon Prime Video already operate internationally, putting pressure on the competitors to follow suit. Disney's purchase of Fox means a presence in India through Star India. Comcast has a presence in Europe through Sky Sports, and Hulu is set to launch internationally in 2021. Netflix, Hulu, and HBO have cemented their place in the entertainment industry. As technology continues to advance and consumers continue to cut the cord on traditional forms of entertainment, streaming services will continue to follow to grow their market share. As we saw recently, many firms such as NBC and CBS have a desire to enter into the streaming market, thus increasing competition for the incumbents. In order for firms to maintain or even expand their market share, they should consider the following. Develop alternative business models. Reliance on content ownership and subscription revenue could impede growth and result in a major threat to profitability. 2. Develop innovative ways to deliver content. Virtual reality has become a growing sector in the entertainment industry. Netflix, Hulu, and HBO should explore ways to produce and distribute content that takes advantage of this technology, for example. And finally, mergers and acquisitions. Firms should explore the idea of acquiring existing niche firms to expand their content library, as well as potentially exploring mergers to achieve more efficient operations. And that'll do it for today's presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.